welcome back to the Access Vikings podcast. I'm Emily Leiker, joined by my Minnesota Star Tribune colleague Andrew Krammer. Ben Gessling is out feeling under the weather today, so we will carry you through the end of the week updates. We're out here Friday at TCO Performance Center in Eagan as the Vikings close out their preparations for their rematch with the Bears on Sunday. We just got done chatting with Kevin O'Connell and then going through open locker room, and after what looked like a long list of limited participants this week, only two guys are named out for the game on Sunday. That's Jonathan Greenard, who, of course, had a shoulder injury, suffered a shoulder injury in the Ravens game. He did not practice at all this week, so that was pretty much expected. Yeah. And then center Ryan Kelly, who had his practice window opened as he makes a return from injured reserve with a concussion. He had his second concussion of the season back in Week 4 against the Steelers, and so then they put him on injured reserve. He is making his way back. Like I said, Greenard was pretty straightforward. O'Connell talked a little bit about how Kelly's week went, and then Kelly talked as well in the locker room.
Yeah, we got him very briefly. He spoke as he was walking out of the locker room. He said he didn't have a lot of time to chat, but we got in to just ask him, hey, how are you feeling? And Ryan Kelly did say he is symptom-free. He has switched helmets. He says, O'Connell keeps referencing, I want him basically to be banging down my door to play. That's how cautious they want to be with Ryan after suffering what was his fifth documented concussion through 10 years. I think he's a 10th year veteran this year. And Ryan, we asked Ryan, are you basically at that point where you're knocking down his door, banging down his door? And he said, yes, I am. So, but as you mentioned, Emily, they ruled him out this week. Kevin O'Connell said this was all part of the plan to ease him back in, so he's going to get at least one more practice week. O'Connell did clarify, though, that Ryan Kelly did take first-team snaps this week, which is notable because obviously he is working back in to play eventually.
Yeah, that means some of these other guys that were listed on the injury report, tight end Josh Oliver, obviously was working his way back this week. He was limited Wednesday and Thursday. We haven't seen the full practice report for Friday yet, but he did not have a game designation going in, so he should be back in the mix alongside TJ Hawkinson and then the plethora of other guys they have in that tight end room now that they can kind of mix and match how they want. J.J. McCarthy, we spaced on mentioning this on Wednesday. This is our bad, but he did come into the week with a little bit of like a hand bruise injury on his right throwing hand that we were told about by Kevin O'Connell in his Wednesday press conference, and then we got to see a little bit of the bandage that McCarthy was wearing. It limited him on Wednesday during practice, but he was a full participant Thursday. Again, we haven't seen the whole report yet unless it just came out. No, I don't think it did.
Sorry, no.
Jump scared me. I was like, oh, maybe it did. No. But I would presume if he was full yesterday, he was likely full today as well, or if he was limited, it was more a precautionary thing than that bothering him. But from what we saw, which the best look of it we got when he spoke on Wednesday afternoon, and he had his hands in his pocket for most of that time, but did pull it out once or twice, and it's black bandage kind of starting above his knuckle because like what happened was he threw and going through the throwing motion, hit his hand on the back of Donovan Jackson's helmet, I believe it was.
Yeah, and I think it was on the 25-yard potential touchdown that Justin Jefferson dropped. So insult to injury there, injury to insult with Jefferson dropping it, then McCarthy banging his hand on Donovan Jackson. He had 4 passes batted at the line, so I wonder if he hit that hand multiple times. Kevin O'Connell and JJ both say this is not going to affect him moving forward, that he threw the ball very well in practices and that they expect him to throw it well on Sunday. So this should be no issue as far as his execution, but you might still see that wrap on his hand on the TV shots on Sunday. O'Connell did not say whether or not he would wear it in the game, but he was asked about it, but he did not say whether or not he will.
Yeah, we'll have to wait. I don't know if the full Bears game statuses have come out yet, but they did have a number of non-participants early in the week, so that'll be one. As that comes out, we'll share it on our socials, but to see who they are missing.
Yeah, Jaquan Brisker not practicing for them this week is huge. He's really good for them at safety. And then it looked like Jalen Johnson's window. I thought I saw something where Jalen Johnson returned to practice today, but it would be a surprise if he were to make it back that quickly to play on Sunday. But they're banged up. They still have Montez Sweat. They still have Kevin Byard. They still have Tyreek Stevenson. They got some talent back there, but they're dealing with more injuries than the Vikings are, because if they have Theo Jackson back, as they will, have Josh Oliver back, Those are going to be two key pieces on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, these were very week 11 injury/practice reports for these teams, at least in terms of the week leading up. Obviously, the Vikings evaded having too many names on the actual game designation list, but it was a week where we saw a lot of guys, older guys especially, have extra work or extra rest worked into their schedules this week, especially today as well. Let's get into a couple of our listener questions as we do on Fridays, starting with this one from Jake about Ryan Kelly, who we obviously were just talking about. A lot is being made of Ryan Kelly changing helmets. How does that help? Why wasn't he wearing the best one already? What goes into players choosing helmets? So it's my understanding that it's completely player choice. They are given a list of helmets that are approved by the NFL and the NFLPA each season. That list is retested and updated each season, so they can go through, and I don't know exactly how many. You can find the list online, but it's about like 9 or 10 around their helmets that they can choose from. And obviously I think a couple are labeled for certain position groups, like you have like a wide receiver DB helmet, stuff like that. But they have a scale that they can, these are all like in the green helmets that they can choose to wear. And then at any point in the season, they can say, for whatever reason, I want a different helmet. I need to change it. Again, it's my understanding the Vikings, that costs money for the team, just to, and the player, whatever. But the Vikings will cover the cost on that. I don't know if that's the case with every club, but it's my understanding that they cover the cost. So with Ryan, he did not change his helmet after the first one, is what I've been told, but did choose to after the second one. So he just upgraded from where he had been on that scale. Again, all of those helmets are approved and good for play. It's just like none of them are bad. It's just the ones higher on the scale maybe have been created more recently. And especially now with the Guardian cap technology, some of the ones highest on the scale actually are almost equitable to what wearing like a lower scale helmet with a Guardian cap over it would be, is my understanding again. So yeah, it's all player choice, and he just opted to change it at this moment. He could change it back. I would guess that probably won't be the case just with how his season has gone, but it's all player choice, and teams can't come in and say, no, you're going to change your helmet. Equipment managers can't do that. It has to be the player. Like, equipment managers can come in and suggest and say, hey, we'll order a helmet for you to try on if you want it, but ultimately it was Ryan Kelly's decision.
Yeah, and it sounds like the NFLPA does a yearly meeting with teams where they come into the offseason, they sit down, they go through the options, they show them the new chart, tell them updates, and they try to get guys to wear the ones that protect them the best. But talking to players about this, because we're going to be writing a story about it as well, it all goes in, different guys have different reasonings for it. Like Christian Darrisaw suffered 2 concussions in 3 weeks like Ryan Kelly did back in 2022. And Darrisaw told me that after that, it was the equipment manager, Mike Parsons, who he credited for convincing him to switch to the highest rated one for offensive linemen. And it was funny because Christian was like, I didn't like how it looked. And I asked him, like, you mean literally just how it looked on your head? And he said, yeah, I didn't like how it had like this bulge in the front that stuck out. He said it took some convincing for me to want to wear it. But he said when he did, the switch has been great because he's had 0 documented concussions since then, even going back to practices. He said it feels lighter on my head. Like, I'm really thankful that I was convinced to make this switch. But then you talk to somebody like Will Fries, who says he's had no concussion issues. He said, I've worn the same one since college. And I said, I've been hit in the head hundreds of times. I've had no issues. Why switch? And I asked him, well, where does yours rank on that list of, the green, darkest green is the best performing in the lab testing. Lighter green is a little worse. And he said, it's somewhere in the green area, but I'm not worried about it, And that's how some guys go into it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if he hasn't had any issues with any concussions, he doesn't see the need to change it.
Well, it's like, I think a good analogy is like, it's like cars, right? Like, they release new models of cars every year that are presumably safer or made to be safer on the road. Yeah. That doesn't mean driving a car from 2018 is less safe, going to get you killed faster or something like that. It's just that there's been continued progressments in in helmet technology and the safety features that they can work into a helmet.
And Will did say that the helmet that he's been wearing since college, it's not the exact same technology from that many years ago. It's a shell that they will then update that version of that helmet. So he has an updated version of the same helmet he has worn, but he hasn't changed. He hasn't made the wholesale change that like Darisaw made or that Blake Brandell said he also made, where that is one that the one that they wear is the one that they're told is the top rated one for offensive linemen. And as you said, some of them are position specific. They'll have the trench ones that are the top ones, top DB ones, quarterback, or so forth.
Right.
You know?
Again, like a car, like there's a model name. It's like you have your Honda and then you have your Honda Civic versus your whatever.
Your CRV.
Yeah, your CRV. Like there's all those different styles, and this is the newest version and stuff. Oh, the full practice report. Just hold. I wanted to see if Jalen Johnson's on here for us. Jalen Johnson is questionable for the Bears on Sunday.
And was this his first practice back today?
Yes, he was limited, so he was not a full participant.
I can't imagine they'd bring him back, but we've seen weirder things. It was last year when Puka Nacua had one limited practice on a short week coming off a knee injury on IR, and the Vikings were like, he ain't going to play. And then he had over 100 yards against him.
Linebacker TJ Edwards and wide receiver Jade Walker are both out for the Bears, and then Brisker is questionable as well.
Yeah, that's a huge one. So the Bears secondary can be very aggressive. I'm sure they still will be regardless of who plays for them. But if those guys play, it'd be a big boost for them against a Vikings offense that needs to get going.
Yeah, back to listener questions. This one from Jay Carr and one that I know you have talked in the locker room about this week. Is there something weird with JJ's cadence or something that is throwing these guys off? Hard to understand why all these guys are suddenly forgetting something that every coach at every level has drilled into their head since they first strapped on pads. This is, of course, referring to the 8 pre-snap penalties against the Ravens.
Yeah, just false starts.
Just false starts.
It was the most false starts a team has had since 2011. You don't have that happen unless a lot of things go wrong. So we can't just put this on the quarterback. And Kevin O'Connell has said as much. It's not just on the quarterback, but he also said they need more poise in the communication. And there's one guy communicating the most before the snap, and it's the quarterback. And so I think there does need to be more of a calmer expectation from the offensive lineman of what is the next word out of JJ's mouth going to be. And it didn't seem like they had that same poise or expectation against the Ravens, obviously. Some of it was just Justin Jefferson flinching, JJ flinching at the wrong time, Brian O'Neill doing that as well, not being focused to getting called for 3 of them. So there was more of a group issue at play here, but I do think if you had to point it out, who was the number one culprit at fault for maybe most of them, or at least 2 or 3 of them, it would be probably McCarthy not having that poise, over-communicating, over-checking something when he didn't need to, or just not having the rhythm and rhyme that his offense needed.
Yeah, and that's, I think, why poise was kind of the talking point around this week. Like, I know sometimes fans, like, want some answer that's like, oh, well, we changed specifically this, but, like, it's not always that something very specific is wrong as the through line through all 8 false starts. There are little things, and even if there's overlap, like, it could be slightly different on even one of Brian O'Neill's false starts to another of Brian O'Neill's false starts. He's not necessarily making the same mistake 3 times in a row, and I think that's why with penalties across the board, but certainly with false starts, sometimes it's just more about the mental aspect, and there's not like okay, we've run this in practice 6 times, you're going to get it right this time.
Yeah, and it's nuanced, right? Yeah. Like there's nuances with the issues. It's the same with the Vikings' lack of production in the passing game. Like it's not all just the quarterback, even though, as JJ said, a lot of it is on me.
Which is the quarterback's job, is to say that.
That's true.
Yeah, is to take responsibility like that. Like he's doing what he's been taught to do as a born and bred QB. Flipping to the defensive side of the ball, some questions here about the outside linebacking group, which has obviously been a big point of discussion the whole season pretty much. Yeah. Starting with, how much will the fine be for Dallas Turner? That was asked by On Wisconsin. So I don't know if there are some Packers fans emailing those questions to you, but that's, of course, referring to Dallas Turner's roughing the passer penalty on Lamar Jackson the other day. That was his 2nd this season. He had also been charged with roughing the passer for launching himself at Justin Herbert in the Chargers loss. He was fined for that one. I talked to him yesterday. and it was a little unclear if he had for sure been fined for this one. I would assume if he was fined for the Herbert one, he was fined for this one as well.
Probably.
We will see for sure on Saturday, but $23,186 is what that second time offense charge is, that penalty.
Yikes.
And he said, I said, did you appeal? Because they can always appeal these. I said, did you appeal the one against Herbert? And he goes, of course, they charged me $20,000. Like, you got to appeal everything.
I got to take that laying down. Yeah.
So safe to say that the one that is $4,000 more, he will also be appealing.
Well, and I thought it was interesting that he was honest. He's an honest guy. He was candid with you about, I'm still learning the nuances and the rules of the NFL there. And his teammates said as much too. Like Van Ginkel said, he's got to learn that. Like, and I hope this is the kind of, and he said, I hope this is the kind of experience that helps him learn that, because you can't have those mistakes. They're costly. That made what could have been a 50-yard field goal into a more of a chip shot 35-yarder. I can't remember the exact numbers, but we've also had fans ask, why are the fines these weird numbers? And to clarify, those numbers were set at a round number back when the CBA was formed and agreed upon in 2020, and then there's a percentage increase every year on those fines to make up for the salary cap, the fact that salaries do go up every year, so the fines will also go up every year, and that's why instead of $20,000, it is 21,500, whatever you said.
The most expensive penalties on the violation chart are physical second offense. These are both second offenses. Physical contact with an official, $81,374.
And I'm not advocating violence against the officials, of course not. But like, why is that the highest fine?
And then fighting, which the fighting one must get levied a lot. Like,
well, you would think,
right?
Depending on what their level of fighting is.
Yeah,
I guess.
I don't know.
Maybe punch thrown, which is why, like, for instance, when Tierre Tart slaps Travis Kelce, he doesn't get kicked out because he knows the rules. He knows that that's not fighting. Fighting is closed fist.
It is interesting on the fine chart. There are some asterisks next to stuff, but then there's not a thing to tell you what the asterisks mean.
Oh, really?
So because like the roughing the passer one, it technically says the first offense is $17,389. Dallas got charged $19,907. So unless the chart they have online is outdated, though it says that it's the updated site for this season, so it should be right. I don't know if there's like a stipulation there about, like, obviously within the roughing the passer there are different.
Did he get fined for unnecessary roughness instead of roughing? It might have been a different fine for the first one.
Oh, he did get charged. Yeah, unnecessary roughness but that's.
It might have been what he got.
But that doesn't have a different. And there's not like a launch in here in the fine chart. So.
Okay. There must be grades that they're not publishing.
And that's one of the roughing the passer has an asterisk next to it. So I'm wondering if, like,
you're probably right,
launching into the quarterback is different than the body weight rule of roughing the passer, and so there might be levels there. But at least what the fine chart tells us is it could be $23,186 for Dallas.
It ain't going to be cheap, no matter what it is. It ain't going to be cheap. Although it's not as much as touching an official, which is interesting that is the most expensive fine a player could get in terms of their scheduled fines.
And Dallas is going to appeal it no matter what. And I said that's fair. I would do the same thing. Other outside linebacker question. This one comes from David. Andrew Van Ginkel's impact probably can't be overstated. Was he always the defensive player they couldn't afford to lose? How are they going to look if Greenard doesn't play? And obviously, Greenard is not going to play on Sunday.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because we've talked about how important Van Ginkel is. We see it. Emily, you wrote about Jalen Redmond, the interior defensive tackle who's done so well. When you asked about him, I think it was when you asked about him, but Brian Flores around that time mentioned that his sack against Jared Goff was because Andrew Van Ginkel is setting up that stunt beforehand. The players are empowered to call things on the field, and if they see something with the formation on offense and they think, hey, if we twist here, we're going to get by the blocking scheme better or whatever, that helps spring Redmond into Jared Goff for the sack on that play. Like, it's the headiness, it's the experience, it's all the stuff that in a check-based system you need in a smart, versatile player like Van Ginkel to command things. And I don't know if he's more important than Jonathan Greenard, because Greenard to me is their best pass rusher. He might be their best defender, period. And so without him, it's going to be a big loss because you see opposing offenses gear their protection plans toward him. They chip him, they double him. Without him, they're going to be able to turn that attention to Van Ginkel, and that's going to further neutralize what he tries to do. So that's going to put the onus on, if it's Dallas Turner, if it's Eric Wilson, whoever they put on that other side, to find a way to pressure. And pressuring's not really Wilson's game. They put him on that edge to be more of that edge-setting run stopper. So in Turner's best asset right now is as a pass rusher, is as applying pressure. It's by slipping by blockers. So they got two fill-in pieces in Wilson and Dallas Turner who do two very different things well, and how they bring that together is going to be interesting against a Bears offense that will be playing a left tackle who was only taken over mid-season for their starter who's on injured reserve against a very slippery quarterback in Caleb Williams.
And good news is that Andrew Van Ginkel was asked on Monday, I think you asked, do you feel like your neck injury is finally behind you? And he said, yeah, I feel good. And he was limited a couple times this week, but again, I think that was just, it's week 11. We're going to let some of these guys take it a little slower than making them go full go in practice, especially for a team they've already seen once this season.
Yeah, and that's great news for the Vikings that he feels good. He played 80%, I think it was, against the Ravens, and that was his most he had played since week 1. So the fact that he's ramping up and then feeling well is great news for them.
Okay, so for Vikings Flashback Friday, we are talking about the 2021 Week 13 Vikings-Lions game. The Lions were 0-10-1 going into this one, beat the Vikings 29-27 with a Goff to Amon-Ra St. Brown touchdown that came with, I think, 4 seconds left on the clock to win. You said before, which I don't think they even mentioned this on the broadcast, Amon-Ra St. Brown's first career touchdown, which is a pretty electric way to get your first career touchdown.
Yeah, the Vikings just ushered in a few years, at least so far to date, of Detroit Lions' dominance in the NFC North. They've at least won back-to-back division titles, starting with that win, as you mentioned. That at least kick-started the trajectory toward that, I should say. Amon-Ra St. Brown's caught 40 touchdowns in the 62 games since then. And that was you saw the game, so I'm curious to get your thoughts on what they talked about in the broadcast in terms of the Mike Zimmer era, the collapse, because not only was that the beginning that set off the Lions to be what they are under Dan Campbell now, it sent the Vikings further careening into the ditch that forced them to go into Kevin O'Connell.
There was one comment, I think, somewhere in the broadcast about Zimmer and Dan Campbell having things to prove in this one a little bit, but it really wasn't too heavy-handed in terms of the broadcast being Zimmer's got to save his job or anything like that. The one thing that did come up a lot with this one was that there was a number of players missing. Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks were the two that were brought up the most, and then I think Danielle Hunter was also in there, Patrick Peterson, quite a few guys, especially on the defensive side, were out of this one, and that is something where they kept on being Zimmer doesn't have his guys. He's playing without his guys in this one.
It was shocking to see just the defensive box score of who was playing in that game. It was Nick Vigil, Blake Lynch, they must have been missing everybody. Bashad Breeland was getting a lot of run in that game, and then of course Cam Dantzler, the corner who gives up the ill-fated game-losing touchdown. So many of which game-losing touchdowns they gave up that season. Right,
and Ben kept on propping this one up as the Cam Dantzler game, and up until the fourth quarter, I was Cam Dantzler hasn't really done anything in this game. Because I try not to look at the box score, look at too much beyond, sometimes seeing what the final score is. So I was nothing's really happened, and then he has an interception, and then he has that at the end of the game where the Lions get 3 or 4 shots at the end zone in the final 30 seconds before they eventually find it and win the game.
And how much time did they have left on that final drive? Because I think you'd mentioned it was fairly quickly. They just kind of marched down the field, bang, 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 and that was the story of this defense. Was in those critical clutch moments, whether it was right before halftime or often at the end of games, they gave up a lot of points.
Yeah, this was right inside the 2-minute warning, so they had 1:50 of game clock, all of which they obviously used to win this one. And they had 3 completions in the drive of over 10 yards, and then several more that were 9 yards. So
the Vikings they were on defense with a 27-23 lead.
Yeah, 27-23.
Had a 4-point lead, just needed to keep them out of the end zone, and Mike Zimmer trusted his defense to get it done, and they absolutely did not. And that it just goes to show you the disconnect between Zimmer and the front office at that point. Things were just going totally haywire with him and Rick Spielman. They weren't getting along. Our colleague Mark Craig has reported about how that draft, that 2020 offseason, or I guess it'd be 2021 offseason, they basically stopped talking to each other through stretches. So Zimmer didn't love some of the options he had to put on the field, and boy, did it show in moments like that game.
Yeah, the Vikings touchdown that ended up giving them the lead right there at the end of the game that they thought they could hold on to came on a drive that sprung up because Dan Campbell left the offense on the field on a 4th and 1. And it was funny because on the broadcast, they're like, another interesting decision from Dan Campbell. And I was just like, wow, like 4 years later, no one would talk about going for it on 4th and 1 in a game like this.
No.
And they were still in their own territory. So maybe it was a little bit of a rough decision. But it was 4th and 1. But then, of course, they fumbled it. So I was literally typing on my phone, like, funny that they're calling this an interesting decision now that he does this all the time and teams across the league do.
Yep.
And then they're announcing that Goff's fumbled it away as he takes a 7-yard sack. And I was like, well, maybe they were just planting the seeds for what that movement would become.
It's funny, the broadcast is caught up now to the point where when they don't do stuff like that, they're like, the 4th down bot says you should do it.
Right. They're like, we have advanced stats that tell you in this exact scenario, you should go for it 97% of the time, whatever it is. The other big, I think, that we have to mention from this game is it's another big Jefferson game. And it was a big Jefferson game in part because I think Dalvin Cook was also missing, and then Adam Thielen goes down early in this one and is out for the game. But Jefferson had 11 receptions for 182 yards, averaged 16.5 yards per catch, and had a touchdown in there as well.
It's funny to hear Jefferson this week talk about needing to go back into savage mode, referencing 2022. Well, he was doing stuff like that in 2021 as well. And yeah, I guess this would have been kind of his start, or games like that are what kind of vaulted him into the superstardom that he's currently in and has been in since then. And defenses, like you mentioned too, like defenses didn't treat him like they treat him now, where they still had to account for Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen. Like Kirk Cousins had more of a, I don't want to say well-rounded, but it seemed like he had to spread the ball out a little bit more.
Yeah, Aaron Glenn had Justin Jefferson in single coverage for most of this game, and that's simply something Justin does not get to see anymore. He said that on Thursday. He was like, I'm rarely ever in single coverage anymore, and that was obviously part of the discussion around the 3rd and 1 against the Ravens last week of Justin wasn't in single coverage. We had to throw it to him, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
That decision by Aaron Glenn in 2021 and that game by Justin Jefferson is why we don't see it very often.
Right. There are a lot of seeds in this one of like, okay, this is why this is like this now, and teams have learned, and the Lions have gotten better, and all of this, even though it's it shows you how much can change in 4 years. With that, there was also a name that came up that I was surprised I hadn't heard of, because we've talked about kick returners and punt returners so much this year with the Miles Price conversation, and that's, I hope I'm saying this right, but Nwangwu.
Kene Nwangwu.
Nwangwu, okay, yeah, because they highlighted him at the start of the broadcast, being like, he's had some great returns this year, really solid. I don't think he had anything too flashy in this one that I can remember, but I was like, oh, have I not heard this guy's name before?
That's crazy, how quickly he's forgotten, which is unfortunate because he had a couple moments in the sun. He had 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns, I believe, as a rookie. That was his rookie year out of Iowa State. And he wasn't much of a running back because he didn't have a lot of reps behind Breece Hall at Iowa State. Comes out, and since then, I think he just had a touchdown for the Jets recently, maybe a couple weeks ago, if not last week. And I think he's got 5 total kickoff return touchdowns in his career. So he's still doing it. But the Vikings, for some reason, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, decided to move on when he had a back injury in training. I believe it was the back injury in training camp. And this was a year after he had missed a preseason due to, I think, a hamstring or a knee injury. I think he hyperextended his knee. Yeah, that's right. So he had some banged up summers that the team just said, you know what, we're going to move on from him because he didn't offer much on offense. But that shocks me that you hadn't heard from him, and it speaks to how quickly this league moves on because he was very good, especially that rookie year.
Well, and again, just by nature of the fact that we've talked so much about returners are part of the reason we're doing this segment, because we were talking about Adam Thielen's last time returning a punt and stuff like that, and we were like, okay, maybe I need to go back and watch some of these games. So that was interesting. But yeah, I think the biggest takeaway from this one is just that it really kind of not reversed, but shook up what the NFC North looks like in terms of the Lions obviously, like I said, we're 0-10-1 coming into this one, celebrated in a very similar fashion to the way we saw the Vikings celebrate their win over the Lions 2 weeks ago, now that the Lions have been kind of the dominant force and stuff. But yeah, it was an interesting one to watch, and the only one from this season, which is of course Mike Zimmer's last season.
Yeah, and it was emblematic of Mike Zimmer. I think it was a good choice, I think, in general, collectively by all of us, to have just this one game from that season, because the rest of them would just be headaches for Vikings fans to relive if this one has not been already, because this was not a great point in Viking tenure. They obviously don't make the playoffs. I do not remember what their final record ends up being, but it's something like 8-9. I think it might have been Mike Zimmer's one of his only losing seasons, if not his only. So yeah, it was defensive collapse after defensive collapse, and a roster that had kind of, speaking of like planting some seeds, like they had Justin Jefferson, they had Christian Darrisaw, but this was still a team that needed to kind of grow and mature around those stars, and the rest of the pieces very much needed a refreshing of the roster.
And it was kind of like them and the Lions were in reverse places, right? And of course, like that's why now, like 4 years later, like it looks they're starting to maybe flip back and stuff like that. But
trying to, if you're the Vikings,
to,
because the Lions back-to-back NFC North champions, and yeah, it does go back to a win like that kind of sets them on that trajectory.
I have one more little take about Jared Goff. I'm using this as a tease to my Instagram, so sorry, Andrew. We'll talk about it off camera, but. One more take about Jared Goff and quarterbacks in their second stops, because this was, I believe, his first season with the Lions. First or second? Yeah.
Yep.
So just quarterbacks in their second stops and how we're seeing more success for some of them in that regard than in their rookie contracts. So.
Yeah, this would have been the season that Kevin O'Connell was offensive coordinating a eventual Super Bowl champion Matthew Stafford, who had just shown up. And Jared Goff had just shown up in Detroit and was 0-10-1 going into that week. And everyone's like, what a bum. What is Detroit doing?
And now Jared Goff looks quite good leading that Lions squad. So that's all for the reflections on that one. I will put up the list of what I have next to watch. I believe it's the beginning of the 2020 season, so the beginning of Jefferson's career and his first performances. But I'll double check that and we'll put that up. That's all we have for today from TCO Performance Center. Ben will be back with us on Sunday post-game as we recap whatever happens in this NFC North rematch, this Caleb Williams versus J.J. McCarthy rematch, which is at noon at U.S. Bank Stadium. The Vikings, of course, still trying to get their first home win under J.J. McCarthy this season. They do have one against the Bengals when Carson Wentz was playing quarterback for this team. It feels like we've lived 6 different seasons in this one season, but we will be back with you for that. Thank you for listening.